The Mediterranean sun beats down on a flat clay roof in the coastal town of Joppa. The afternoon air is thick with the scent of salt water. God had to enact Plan B. He had to pry open the emergency exits and let the Romans, the Greeks, and the global outsiders into the room. The leaves are scattered, the lineage is severed. But then, a single green shoot breaks the hard crust of the earth. A new king is coming. When Isaiah speaks of this future king in chapter 11, he paints a picture that completely violates the nationalistic hopes of his terrified audience. He does not predict a violent, local rebellion to slaughter the invaders. He sees a root of Jesse standing as a massive, towering banner on a high mountain ridge, the heavy fabric snapping in the desert wind. And he sees the Goyim, the very nations driving the chariots, the very empires currently burning the cities, rallying to that banner. The enemy is not destroyed. They are invited. This prophetic vision expands until it bursts the seams of Jewish expectation. By the time you reach Isaiah 49, the voice of God speaks directly to his chosen servant, the Messiah, and hands him his cosmic mission. Listen to the staggering scale of the assignment in verse 6. It is too small a thing for you to be my servant to restore the tribes of Jacob. It is too small a thing to bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. We treat the Gentiles as an afterthought. We view them as a divine backup plan, a sudden plot twist scribbled into the margins of a story. It is too small a thing. Rescuing only one biological family is an insult to the sheer magnitude of the cure. The power of this chosen servant is too potent. The grace is too heavy to be confined within the tiny, disputed borders of one Middle Eastern territory. The light is not a territorial bonfire. It is a global sunrise. The prophets saw it. They shouted this reality into the stone streets of Jerusalem. They wrote it onto parchment scrolls that were meticulously copied and fiercely guarded for generations. But humans have a tragic, predictable reflex when handed a gift of this unimaginable magnitude. We build a fence around it. You have probably walked into a room where you immediately knew you did not belong. You can feel it in the air, the hushed whispers, the sharp glances, the invisible velvet ropes pulled tight across the doorway. You stand on the edge of a polished hardwood floor, your hands sweating, your chest tight, realizing that everyone else in the room knows the secret password, the right posture, the exact way to hold themselves, and you do not. If you look closely at the landscape of modern faith, you will see we have quietly reconstructed those exact same velvet ropes. We take this massive, earth-shattering invitation that was originally never meant for them. But if you look closer, if you look past the vision on the hot roof, the one Isaiah shouted about from the mountain ridge, the one Solomon prayed for in the center of the gold-lined temple, and we shrink it down. We shrink it to fit our specific denomination, our political tribe, our cultural comfort zone. We act like bouncers standing in front of the heavy wooden doors of our sanctuaries, demanding that people clean themselves up before they are allowed to sit in the presence of the divine. If you are in a season where you feel like the Nakri in your own spiritual community, you know exactly how this cold exclusion feels. You sit in the padded chair, listening to the swelling music and the flawlessly polished sermons, but you carry a history that refuses to fit the neat, sanitized testimonies of the people sitting right next to you. You carry a divorce, a persistent addiction, a staggering grief, or a lingering doubt that feels completely alien in the pristine spaces of modern religion. The silence in the room tells you that you are an outsider. It tells you that you are an afterthought. It tells you that you are Plan B. But the ancient blueprint tells a completely different story. The kingdom of God is not an exclusive club protecting its borders. It is a rescue mission, actively dismantling them. We forget that the original chosen people were not selected because they were genetically superior or morally flawless. Pass the fiery letters of Paul and travel all the way back to the oldest, most tightly guarded scrolls in the possession of the Hebrew people. They were chosen to be a conduit, a pipeline of grace meant to flood the surrounding deserts. But the tragedy of the human heart is our obsession with hoarding the water. We prefer a God who only saves people who vote like us, talk like us, and worship like us. We take the blinding global sunrise of the prophetic vision and try to stuff it into a neat, manageable flashlight that only illuminates our own small, fiercely protected tribe. We turn the radical, bleeding inclusion of God into an administrative checklist. But right at the very end of the Old Testament scroll, just before 400 years of crushing, suffocating silence falls over the biblical timeline. One final prophet steps onto the stage, and he delivers a message to the gatekeepers that is so shocking, so deeply offensive to the religious elite, that it burns like salt in an open wound. The fire burns on the bronze altar. The smoke rises thick and black in the Jerusalem sky. But the smell is wrong. It is not the sweet scent of a flawless lamb. It is the foul stench of a diseased animal. The priests drag blind sheep across the rough stone courtyard. They pull crippled goats over the holy threshold. You find a reality that shatters the backup plan narrative entirely. The knock at Peter's door is not a disruption. It is an echo. They offer the creator of the cosmos, the scraps they cannot sell in the market. They yawn at the altar. They roll their eyes at the rituals. They call the worship a burden. A prophet named Malachi watches the insult unfold. He is the final voice before 4 centuries of absolute silence. He delivers a message from a God who is deeply offended by the cheap, discarded offerings thrown onto his fire. God does not just reject the sick animals. He demands they shut the heavy wooden temple doors entirely. He tells them to extinguish the useless, insulting fires. He wants the entire religious machine locked down. And then, the prophet drops a theological bomb. Malachi, chapter 1, verse 11. God looks past the choking smoke. He looks past the corrupt priests. He points out to the far horizon. From the rising of the sun to its setting, my name will be great among the nations. Among the Goyim, in every place incense will be offered to my name, and a pure offering. Look at the massive irony happening on the Temple Mount. The religious elite stand in the inner courtyard. They hold their sick animals. They assume they hold a permanent monopoly on divine access. They assume God is trapped in their rituals. He is not. The inclusion of the nations is not a New Testament pivot. It is the Old Testament premise. The real question of this entire biblical narrative: God is already watching the Gentiles. He sees a pure offering rising from the pagan cities. He sees a global worship that the priests in Jerusalem cannot even imagine. He sees a day when the uncircumcised outsiders will carry a reverence that the chosen insiders have completely lost. The temple in Jerusalem is not the limit of his reach. It is the starting line. The prophecy burns in the parchment. The scroll is rolled up. The long, heavy silence falls. For 400 years, the sky turns to brass. The voice of prophecy goes quiet. The world waits in the dark. Empires rise with the sword. Empires crumble into the dust. The Greeks march through with heavy bronze armor. The Romans pave their massive stone roads. The stage is being set for a collision. The ancient blueprint sits in the dark, waiting to be read properly. And then, a Pharisee sitting in a room centuries later finally unrolls the scroll and connects the dots. When theologians examine the 11th chapter of Romans, they are not just reading a theological argument. They are watching a master scholar finally decipher an ancient code. Paul of Tarsus knew the Old Testament scrolls better than anyone. He had the Hebrew consonants memorized. Isn't when God finally decided to let the outsiders in. It is this. Why were we so slow to see that the door was never closed? He knew the stories of Abraham's covenant in the bloody sand, Solomon's prayer in the echoing golden courtyard, and Malachi's warning through the choking smoke of the altar. For centuries, the religious elite viewed those specific Gentile prophecies as bizarre anomalies. They were treated as footnotes. But Paul sees the thread. He looks at the sudden inclusion of the global world, the Roman centurions, the Greek merchants, the pagan outsiders and he gives it a specific Greek title, mysterion, a mystery. In modern English, a mystery is a crime to be solved. But in the ancient Greek, a mystery is not a puzzle. It is a secret reality that has been hidden in plain sight, locked in a dark room, waiting for the precise moment. When the heavy door is thrown open and the light floods in, Paul realizes that the temporary resistance of the Jewish nation to the Messiah was not a catastrophic failure of God's design. It was the exact mechanism used to force the gates open for the rest of humanity. The stumbling of Israel was the wealth of the world. To explain this, he uses a violent agricultural image. He points to a cultivated olive tree, its roots dug deep into the ancient, nutrient-rich soil of the patriarchs. He describes a sharp iron knife slicing through the bark, cutting off some of the natural branches. If you have ever felt like a foreigner to the promises of God, this matters. If you have ever flipped through the ancient texts, and then he describes wild olive branches, the uncultivated Gentiles, the Nokri, the outsiders being shoved violently into the fresh cuts. They are bound tightly against the wood, their fibers merging, eventually feeding on the thick, rich sap of a root they did not plant. The Gentiles were not planted in a separate, secondary garden. They were grafted into the original tree. The wild branches are brought into the very heart of the ancient covenant. They are given full, unrestricted access to the lifeblood of the promise. But Paul issues a sharp, stinging warning to the wild branches. Do not become arrogant. Do not stand over the broken natural branches, lying in the dry dirt, and assume you are inherently superior. You do not support the root. The root supports you. The concept of Plan B implies that God dropped the original architectural blueprint the moment the first builders failed. It assumes he had to improvise a new house. But the grafting of the wild olive tree proves that the blueprint was always meant to include a global forest. The wild branches were written into the genetic code of the root from the very moment God spoke to Abraham in the desert. The inclusion of the nations is not a frantic, last-minute correction. It is the brilliant culmination of the oldest promise on record, and wondered if your specific life, your specific bloodline, actually belongs in a narrative so fiercely focused on one Middle Eastern family. Every hidden prophecy, every subtle shift in the Hebrew vocabulary, every open door in the stone courtyard, it was all pointing to a singular, breathtaking reality. And when you finally see the sheer scale of what God was building all along, you have to pause and ask yourself where you are actually standing in that courtyard today. A nomad stands under a starry desert sky, and a promise is made to bless every family on earth. A king builds a massive fortress of cedar and gold and prays for the outsider to walk right through the front doors. A Moabite widow falls in the scratching dirt of a barley field and permanently anchors the Nokri into the royal bloodline. A kingdom is hacked down to a jagged stump by Assyrian axes, and a green shoot becomes a banner for the warring nations. A chosen servant is handed his cosmic mission, and rescuing only one biological family is deemed far too small a thing. A corrupt priesthood offers 6 sheep on a bronze altar, and God points to a pure, global worship rising from the pagan cities. A scholar finally deciphers the ancient, locked mystery, and the wild olive branches are grafted violently into the sacred root. The answer changes how you read every prophet from Genesis to Malachi. God was not improvising. He was executing a blueprint. One blueprint, one story. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the word Nokri, the foreigner, the alien. It is one thing to vaguely bless the entire globe in Genesis. It is an entirely different thing to stand in the center of Israel's most sacred, exclusive real estate, while the smoke is still thick and the gold is still flashing. And to look at the horizon, specifically looking for the stranger. The outsider was not an intruder in the temple. The outsider was the point. If you are in a season where you feel completely disqualified by your history, where the velvet ropes of modern religion have convinced you that your blood, your failures, or your past make you a secondary citizen in the kingdom of God, you need to look at the root. You are not a backup plan. You are the original intention. The God of the ancient Near East did not wait for Israel to fail before he thought of you. He wrote your inclusion into the very first lines of the contract. He engineered the entire history of the world to ensure the heavy bronze gates would be left wide open, and the sharp, chemical sting of tanning leather from the vats downstairs. A fisherman named Simon Peter is hungry. His stomach rumbles. To find the original ink on that blueprint, you have to bypass the early church completely. You have to leave the coastal breezes of Joppa, and may the God who refused to keep his grace locked behind a theological border graft you so deeply into the lifeblood of his promise that you never again doubt your place in his house. If this opened something in you, subscribe, leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who feels like an outsider to the faith, someone who needs to know they were never Plan B. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts and travel back thousands of years, past the divided kingdoms, past the gold of Solomon's temple, to a moment under a starry, silent desert sky. The place to start is not with a fisherman on a roof. It is with a nomad standing in the sand, holding a promise that contains a single word we have completely misunderstood. When you unroll the parchment of the earliest Genesis manuscripts, the ink traces a radical departure from the religious norms of the ancient Near East. In the ancient world, tribal gods are violently territorial. A deity belongs to a specific geography, a specific bloodline, and their primary job is to secure wealth and victory for their own followers. If you worship the god of the mountain, you expect him to slaughter the people of the valley. But the text of Genesis 12 shatters this paradigm. God calls a man named Abram out of a pagan city, promises to make him a great nation, and then attaches a clause that breaks every rule of ancient theology. He says, "In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Down below, the smell of roasting meat and baking bread drifts up from an open courtyard fire. But up here on the roof, the world is suddenly dissolving. Israel is not the ultimate destination of God's grace. It is the distribution center. We are a species that loves to build fences. We instinctively sort the world into us and them, and we assume the divine operates with the same exclusionary borders. We read the Old Testament through the lens of human tribalism, viewing it as a fiercely localized story of one family fighting for survival in the Canaanite dirt. We assume the camera angle is entirely internal. But the perspective of Genesis is always remarkably wide. The calling of Abraham is the precise moment the global rescue operation is launched. God isolates one man, not to abandon the rest of humanity, but to create a pilot program for their redemption. When theologians examine the famous covenant in Genesis 15, they find a ritual involving severed animal halves, a smoking firepot, and a blazing torch moving through the heavy, blood-soaked darkness. It is an ancient, visceral contract, but the promise sealed in that dark desert night is never restricted to the biological descendants who will eventually inherit the sand and the stone. It is a promise that the theological DNA of this family will eventually spill over their borders. You see this structural design embedded. A trance falls over him. The sky tears open. A massive linen sheet descends, lowered by its four corners, spilling over with creeping things, reptiles, in the very architecture of Israel's early existence. The law given on Sinai makes explicit unprecedented provisions for the foreigner living among them. The agricultural codes command farmers to leave the edges of their wheat fields unharvested, the golden stalks left standing, in the wind, specifically for the immigrant and the outsider whose stomach is empty. The design was always expansive. Yet, over centuries of exile, our famine, and war, the keepers of the texts begin to fold inward. The promised blessing for the nations slowly mutates into a protective barrier against them. The global mission shrinks into a localized defense mechanism. The theological fence is built higher and higher until the outside world is viewed only as a threat to be managed. But the original architecture of the promise refuses to be completely buried. It waits patiently in the very stones. of the most sacred building the nation will ever construct. And centuries later, a king wearing heavy robes will stand before a glittering new temple, raise his hands toward the sky, and pray a prayer that forcefully reopens the blueprint. Because the next massive clue is not hidden in a vague poetic prophecy, it is permanently anchored to Israel's highest holy ground, and birds of prey creatures that every instinct in his Jewish bones screams at him not to touch. Kill and eat, a voice says. Gold flashes in the Jerusalem sun. Smoke billows heavy and dark from the bronze altar. 120 priests blow silver trumpets. The sound rattles the massive cedar beams. A thick, blinding cloud fills the inner sanctuary. The presence of God drops so intensely that the priests stumble backward out of the holy place. They gasp for air. They cannot stand in the heat of the glory. This is the climax of Israel's history. The desert wandering is finally over. The canvas tent is replaced by solid stone. The Ark of the Covenant rests in utter darkness behind a heavy veil. Stones are cut. Cedars are carved. Gold is hammered flat. Blood is spilled. A house is built. King Solomon stands on a bronze platform in the center of the courtyard. He spreads his hands toward the open sky. He begins to pray. He prays for the king. He prays for the nation. He asks for rain during crushing droughts. He asks for victory against encroaching armies. He asks for forgiveness when the people eventually rebel. Listen to the rhythm of his voice in 1 Kings chapter 8. If they sin, forgive them. If famine strikes, hear them. If enemies attack, save them. It is a deeply internal moment. It is a private covenant between a deity and his chosen bloodline. He refuses 3 times. He rejects the command. The sheet vanishes back into the blinding blue sky. And while his mind is still spinning, and then, right in the center of this fiercely nationalistic dedication, the king pivots. He looks past the tribes of Israel. He looks past the borders of the kingdom. He prays for a man who is not even there yet. He speaks of the foreigner. He prays for the outsider who comes from a distant country, the one drawn by the rumors of this God, the one who has no biological right to stand in this space. Solomon asks that when this stranger stands in this courtyard and prays toward this building, God would listen. God would lean down from heaven and act. He asks God to answer the foreigner. He does not ask the foreigner to convert first. He does not demand a circumcision ritual. He simply asks God to hear the cry of the alien. Why? So that all the peoples of the earth may know this. Name. The temple is not a fortress designed to keep the world out. It is a beacon designed to draw the world in. The doors are open. The courtyard is wide. The invitation is public. The God of the mountain is claiming the entire earth. The most sacred real estate in Israel was engineered for the outsider. But to understand just how scandalous Solomon's prayer truly is, you cannot rely on the polite English translation, trying to decode the hallucination. A heavy knock echoes at the wooden gate below. Roman soldiers are standing in the dust. They are asking for him. You have to look at the exact Hebrew words echoing across that stone courtyard. Because there are 2 distinct words used for the outside world in the ancient text. One implies a threat. The other unlocks a mystery. The English translation often flattens the vast, rugged landscape of the ancient Hebrew text. When you read through the Old Testament in a modern translation, you will repeatedly encounter the word Gentile or nation, and it usually carries the heavy, threatening weight of a geopolitical enemy. We picture faceless armies, idol worshippers, and chaotic masses carrying iron spears across the border. And there is a specific Hebrew word for that collective mass of humanity outside the covenant. The word is goyim. It is the plural of goy, a word that simply means a nation, a body of people, or a massive swarm. When the prophets warn about the goyim, they are usually talking about the encroaching empires of Babylon or Assyria that threaten to crush the Israelites into the dust. The goyim are the overwhelming, violent sea of the outside world. But the thick ink on the scroll of 1 Kings 8:41 tells a much more intimate story. When King Solomon prays for the outsider who travels from a distant land, most people read this story in the book of Acts and assume this is the pivot point of history, to look at the massive cedar beams and hammered gold of the temple. He does not use the word goyim. He uses a completely different term. The word translated as foreigner or stranger here is the Hebrew nokri. The nokri is not a faceless empire. The noun describes an individual alien, a singular outsider, someone whose very presence feels strange and out of place in the cultural fabric of Israel. The root of the word carries the tension of recognizing something that is profoundly different. If something about these ancient definitions is unearthing a reality you've never been taught, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So the Nokri is pulled directly into the center of the holy space. You can actually hear the profound vulnerability of this word earlier in the biblical narrative. It is the exact word spoken by a Moabite widow named Ruth in chapter 2. Verse 10. She falls on her face, in the dirt of a Judean barley field, the rough grain scratching her skin. And she asks Boaz why he is showing her. They think this is the exact second God changes his mind. The assumption is that because the nation of Israel largely rejected the Messiah, such radical kindness, she identifies herself as a Nokria, the feminine form of the word. She is fully aware that her bloodline disqualifies her from the promises of the God of Israel. She expects to be turned away. But Solomon's prayer permanently alters that expectation. The king establishes a legal and theological precedent that the God who dwells in the thick darkness of the temple is actively listening for the voice of the Nokri. That changes everything. It means the architecture of Israel's faith was explicitly designed to accommodate the alien. The Gentile is not a theological afterthought. They are the original target. Solomon's prayer was a deliberate crack in the heavy bronze doors of exclusionary religion. But centuries later, a prophet would walk onto the stage and take those doors completely off their hinges. A kingdom splinters. An empire march. The heavy iron wheels of Assyrian war chariots crush the dry soil of the northern kingdom, throwing up thick clouds of choking dust. A prophet named Isaiah stands in the shadow of this violence. He looks at the royal dynasty of David, once a towering, magnificent cedar that shaded the land, and he sees it hacked down by the heavy axe of divine judgment. He sees nothing but a dead, jagged stump left in the dirt. The branches are burned,